I earned my degree online at Arizona State University. I chose to get my degree at ASU because I knew that I'd get a quality education, they were recognized for excellence, and that I would be prepared for the workforce upon graduating. To be associated with ASU, both as a student and alum, it makes me extremely proud, and having experienced the program, I know now that I'm set up for success. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.
To be a Team USA skier, it takes dedication, determination, and lots of hard work. But it doesn't take all that to score unlimited 2% cash rewards on purchases. Just use the Active Cash Visa credit card from Wells Fargo and tap to pay with that natural-born talent and unwavering focus. Earn unlimited 2% cash rewards on purchases with the Active Cash Visa credit card from Wells Fargo. Terms apply. Visit wellsfargo.com/activecash. Visa, proud sponsor of the Olympics and Paralympic Games.
Hey, Howard.
In case you need a lawyer, here's my business card. I'm attorney Howard Ankin.
Oh, hey, Howard.
If you or someone you know has been hurt at work, Ankin Law can get the medical bills paid, the lost wages reimbursed,
Oh, hey, Howard.
and the compensation you deserve.
Hey, Howard.
We're one of the largest filers throughout the state of Illinois of workers' compensation claims. We're here to help. Call 312-6-million. Injury law made personal, that's Ankin Law.
From your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine Podcast with your hosts, Jim Margalus, James Fegan, and Josh Nelson.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome to the Sox Machine Podcast. I'm Jim Margalus, managing editor of SoxMachine.com, in place of Josh Nelson because it's time to partake in a tradition that makes February just a little bit shorter. I'm joined by Keith Law, who's fresh off releasing all of his rankings at The Athletic, top 100 prospects, top 20 prospects for every farm system, and then a ranking of those very farm systems in which the White Sox finished 8th. He's always kind enough to join us to discuss his White Sox rankings and the greater player development world at large, and this year is no different. Over the course of the conversation, I'll be working in questions that were submitted to us by Sox Machine supporters at the 10 War tier. When we have the opportunity to open the floor for reader and listener questions, we give our 10 War supporters a heads up. They send us quality questions, and if they're not already in our outline, we try to mix them in as time allows. For more information on Sox Machine subscriptions and upgrading your plan, visit soxmachine.com/products. With all that out of the way, it's time to bring in Keith Law to talk about that number 8 farm system. Thanks, Keith, for joining the Sox Machine podcast once again. Always a treat to see you at the winter meetings for 20 seconds. I really look forward to it each December. Before we get into the reason for the season with your prospect rankings, I want to talk about one guy who is no longer eligible for White Sox prospect rankings because he graduated, but still a fascinating case, Colson Montgomery. Last time around, we were both in agreement that there were at least one serious fault line under his game that kind of jeopardized the whole career from getting off the ground in terms of his major league potential. And it seems like at the end of the year, or beginning of the year, he gets Arizona sabbatical taken out of circulation because he had a 41% strikeout rate. End of the year, 3-win shortstop, 20 homers in 71 games. It seems like no matter where you ranked him, you would have been correct, whether you ranked him first overall or out of the top 10. So how do you negotiate the huge, the roller coaster he went on, and where have you ended up with him now in terms of what do you think his impact can be?
It's a great question. Obviously, he's a different player than he was when we talked last year, right? They completely reworked his swing, and that at least got him to power. It didn't really get him to hit. He still struck out quite a bit in the big leagues, and it's not an accident that they called him up while they were in Denver. The number of people commenting, "Look, you just Colson Montgomery, rabble." They freaking called him up in Coors Field. They're not stupid. If you look at what he did, especially after that, it's fine. It's fine. That's definitely not what they thought they were getting when they drafted him, but it's fine. The thing I'll be watching for most is his defense. I know it graded out pretty well in the big leagues by StatCast, which I think OAA is probably the most reliable defensive metric we have publicly. He's never played shortstop that well for me, certainly not post-back injury. So I'll be very curious if that holds up over a more reasonable sample. But in terms of the bat, look, he could be this guy. Yeah, it's 20 homers a year. I don't think he's going to hit 40 over a full season, but he could hit 20 odd homers a year with a low on base percentage. If he does that and say that he plays really good defense at third base, that's probably a regular. I know it's a weird shape of production, but that's something. He is a prospect again. He was not a prospect, really, not much of a prospect a year ago. I guess he was a prospect, but not a very good one because everything, right? The defense wasn't working. He wasn't moving well. He was swinging, missing an inordinate amount and wasn't getting any production when he made contact. Now, at least they've reworked him so that when he makes contact, there is some real production. And that's actually a massive improvement, right? That is a huge step forward over what he was giving them a year ago.
Yeah, the thing I watched for him is, and the thing that kind of set off flags when I watched him a year or two ago was that like he seldom beats good pitches. And I mean, obviously good pitches are designed to get somebody out, but having watched Brooks Baldwin rake his way up to the majors, just like his bat would occasionally beat a good pitch to a spot. Mm-hmm. And Montgomery couldn't do that. But last year, especially as he started to get some footing, torpedo bat seemed to help. It doesn't help everybody, but it seemed to help him. That like he was actually starting to beat some pitchers who were brought into the game to beat him, like lefty. Yep. He was able to thwart. So like there are some strides there. So I think he's and and good thing he is an unfinished project right now in terms of his major league potential. But certainly, I think fascinating to watch even from like a prospect standpoint, because he still kind of is a prospect in terms of what is he going to be. That's still kind of an open question.
He's got half a season in the big leagues, right? Which is, on the one hand, like he really produced, probably the best he's produced since before the back injury. On the other hand, half a season. I don't know how much he was truly challenged. He certainly didn't get around the league. We want to see him sustain that kind of production over a larger sample, facing teams multiple times, facing pitchers multiple times. Like, it's a great start. You can't, I'm not taking anything away from what he did in the debut. I see some holes, right? I see a guy whose swing decisions probably still aren't great, who swings and misses a lot, and that's going to drive the OBP down, even if he does get to some power. But can he adjust, right? He is still young-ish. I think he plays at 23 this year. That's still pretty young to continue to improve and continue to make adjustments. And the fact that he did make a massive adjustment with the White Sox help last May is a great sign. This isn't a guy who's refused to make adjustments or been physically unable to do so. He did a huge one that kind of had his career on the line, and he did it enough to get to the big leagues and be productive.
Speaking of Montgomery's contact issues, I'll go to Braden now, who led your the top of your list. And I'm a fan too. I had him second on my list, but one of the things I grappled with was the contact rate, like a little bit below 70%. When I watch him, like, it surprised me to see that his contact rate was that low. Like, he doesn't seem like he chases too much. It doesn't seem like he has glaring holes. To me, it strikes me as like maybe he needs to balance his swings a little bit, righty and lefty, and find an equilibrium there. How do you end up rationalizing the contact rate, or like where he can go from there and improving it?
Well, I look at him as he was definitely more unpolished as a hitter when he was first drafted by the Red Sox, obviously, and then suffered that massive ankle injury that cost him the whole end of that year and the beginning of this year. And I think it helped encourage the White Sox to start him pretty slow. So I looked at him as almost like a half a year to a full year behind his peers from the same college draft class. And even if you didn't kind of give him that little bit of grace for the injury, he was always that guy. And I loved Montgomery. I had him as a top 5 player in his draft class. So in no way, shape, or form am I saying he was a bad pick or a bad guy for them to trade for. He's still got a ton of upside. But he's behind. He's not Nick Kurtz as a hitter. And I also think he was at Stanford, which doesn't do a great job with hitter development. That is 1 year at Texas A&M. And there, I think it was basically show off for the draft. I don't think he was doing a whole lot of adjusting or changing during that time period. Also, he was successful. So to me, last year was probably the first time he'd gotten some real proper player development in terms of working on things like swing decisions, in terms of working on particularly his right-handed swing, where he can flash some more power, but there's definitely going to be worse results from the right side. And I do think eventually it may be a question of whether he continues to switch hit. Like, he swings and misses a little too much from the left side too, to be clear, but it's worse right-handed. And I think that's only going to continue to diverge as he moves up. I think this is a big year for him because now the injury's in the rearview mirror. He's coming off of a basically full season, which includes him going to the fall league and hitting extremely well, which everybody does there. But still, he did what he was supposed to do. Now he goes this year, should start at AA with the goal of getting to AAA by, say, July or so. And what I really want to see from him now is higher contact rates. It's not even so much in the strikeouts, but your actual swing and miss rate, that's got to come down. We got to see more contact and better contact, but it's more, to me, it's mostly about more contact. You're a college product. You're 22, 23 this year. You should hit AA pitching for a pretty high contact rate. And then hopefully that moves him up to AAA and puts him in line for a potential call up. There's no urgency, but you want him to be in position that they could call him up in the last month or two of the season.
Then behind him, you had Caleb Bonemer, who a rare White Sox prep pick, who after 1 year, seems like keep up the good work. There aren't any flags really.
It's outstanding because I think when you and I talked about him maybe a year ago, and I was sort of like, I don't know what they got, because every time you'd see him, or I didn't see him live because he was bad his senior spring, and the consistent word I got from scouts was like, every time you go see this guy, it's a different swing. So who is he? Great job by the White Sox. White Sox fans that I hear from are so critical of the team's player development. And I think since Getz was elevated to the top job, though, we're actually seeing players develop. We're seeing players get better. They get Bonemer in. He's got one swing. It's super consistent. He made a lot of contact. I think some of this is credit to the kid, but a lot of it is credit to the org, too. You are starting to see the kind of player development that I think White Sox fans have been begging for years at this point. He's one of the shining stars.
I was going to ask if this can be carried over to Billy Carlson, Jaden Fauske, in terms of building some confidence that the White Sox are an org that can actually develop prep players versus being an org where, in previous years or a decade ago, they might be considered an organization where a player goes to die or not thrive, or you hope that he gets out so another org can develop him. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Yes. Carlson is fascinating because he is a kind of a big study in contrasts, because he is an incredible defensive shortstop. It's one of the best high school shortstops I think I've ever seen, including a cannon of an arm. But he is just one of those where'd the ball go? Oh, wait, it's in his glove. He's in the right spot. He's moving quickly. It is, I always say these guys are like wizards. Starlin Cabo at the Marlins. Those are the two best shortstops I saw at any level defensively all of last year. Wow. And Carlson has power, even though he's not that physical yet. I think he's going to get quite a bit stronger. The swing is not good. I mean, he bars that lead arm, and his hands are so deep, so far behind him. I had a guy describe it as his hands just get lost back there, and I have not come up with a better way to explain it. They are going to have to help him with that. And that's not a minor change. Now, they just overhauled Colson Montgomery's swing. That should give you a greater degree of confidence. They got Bonemer at least to pick one swing and go with it. I don't think they gave him that swing, but they certainly helped him say, no, these are your swing mechanics. This is how we want you to swing. And he did all year. So that should give you some degree of confidence that they can do something with Carlson. I loved the pick too, but there's risk when you're talking about taking a guy with the full intention of changing something about his swing or something about his delivery. That does increase the risk. Whereas with Fauske, obviously a local kid out there, I think the swing is fine. It is much more a function of pick your pitches to drive, because you watch him in BP and there's pull power out to the, for these left-handed hitters, so out to right center, and you get in games and he's hit first, which is great. Love seeing a guy who's, especially that age, no, I'm putting the ball in play no matter what. That's awesome. Maybe, go out and do that for the first half of the season. I'm fine with that. But you should be thinking about, all right, I'm in a hitter's count here. It's 2-0-3-1. What am I looking for here that I could actually just get a little deeper and pull and just get all that? Because I think there's at least above average, maybe plus power in there. You do that 15 times a year, you're a completely different player. And that's where I think his trajectory is. And that's a more modest kind of adjustment or more modest amount of player development than what we're talking about with Carlson. But Carlson has a lot more upside because of the position and because he could truly be a 5-tool player if we believe he can hit.
With Carlson, kind of a rough, I wouldn't call it a comp because I don't know if they're actually comparable in terms of the issues or the way they go about hitting, but in terms of value, from a first-round pick, defensive first, I kind of think about Adam Everett as a shortstop who he might be the first shortstop in terms of as wins above replacement are starting to get some traction, realizing how much value he provided being so good at shortstop for the right lineup where he didn't have to be a plus hitter. He just needed to play great defense, hit ninth, occasionally turn the lineup over, and he would provide a lot of value that way.
It's funny because I was looking him up. I was writing about somebody else the other day where that is a profile, right? The defense first, put the ball in play, not a whole lot else. To me, that's kind of a floor for Carlson. Like I really think there's more ceiling there because he does have more raw power. And maybe that's the entire difference, but he's got to hit enough to get to that power. But I do think Carlson is going to add value with his glove basically the moment he gets to the big leagues. And it's more a matter of, can they get him to just put the ball in play more? And, it's the old bromide, right? You got to hit for power. I don't know if he's going to hit, not right away, but I know he's got power, and it really could end up 80 defense in the end. I hate overrating or overpraising a high schooler where it's, God, we've only seen him on high school fields. What do we really know? They don't look like that. I've seen a lot of them. That's pretty exceptional defense for a high schooler. And instincts, movement, hands, arm, everything you're looking for. Jesus, I know he's California, but come on, that guy's playing it like an advanced college player. So it's exciting to see a guy like that. And in the case of someone like Carlson, where you realize there's more potential, you get greedy. No, I want it all. I want the 20 homer elite defensive shortstop, and I want him to get on base a little bit too, because I think he can. I think all of that is in there. And I'm pretty sure the White Sox I think that was their guy all along realistically. And just from talking to some of their guys, I think they were pretty stoked that he was there at their pick.
Yeah, I couldn't find any White Sox prospect who is regarded as highly or nearly as highly defensively. Even way back to Robin Ventura, who won Gold Gloves pretty quickly out of the gate, and just like, hey, he'll be competent was basically the takeaway. Every outfielder that the White Sox have had has been pluses. There's always a catch, like needs to improve route running, and jumps, and then they turn out to be pretty good. But yeah, this is the biggest raves I've ever seen for a White Sox prospect defensively. So I'm looking forward to seeing in action.
Mm-hmm. This is Steve Smith here, former NFL wide receiver and host of the 89 Show on YouTube. In my day, I'd go up against defenders twice my size and wasn't afraid of getting hit. But one thing terrified me, people learning I had a mental health issue. I thought I'll seem weak, but being open about your struggles isn't weak. It's the only way to overcome them. That's where BetterHelp Online Therapy comes in. Visit BetterHelp.com/radio, BetterHelp.com/radio to get started. BetterHelp.com/radio.
When it comes to the pitching side, is Hagen Smith back?
I think so. I think he's back from seeing him in fall league. Now, the separate question is, what does back constitute, right? What are we actually getting here? I don't know that it's super high upside anymore, but I think he's back in the sense that he's a major league starting pitcher. Right? He was awful at the beginning. I don't know if there's chicken and egg, right? Was the elbow bothering him all along? Was the elbow maybe a little bit of a cover for the fact that he'd sort of lost his delivery and he wasn't throwing strikes, and it was an excuse to send him back to Arizona to try to work with him a little bit? He came back in the season and looked better. Then I saw him in fall league, where, I love when teams send pitchers like that out there. It's just a chance to get work in about as low pressure an environment as you can. There's nobody in stands. It's me, some scouts, and, the occasional mom or girlfriend. So it's perfect. And he looked really good. And I was texting one of the White Sox guys, did you change something? Is the slider different? He said, no, not really. It's just that it was so much better. Even versus when I'd seen him in March. It was, oh, wow, this is, when I saw Hagen Smith the last time in college, he didn't really have his slider that day. I think the last time I saw him really good like that was sophomore or freshman year. As an underclassman, I saw it. This was like that again. So it was very exciting to see that back. I think he's probably going to always walk a few too many guys. He'll probably always have a little bit of a platoon split, but these are things you're just trying to sort of make incremental gains, because the foundation for at least a fourth starter, at least, is back. Whereas if we'd had this conversation in May, I would have just been like, I have no idea. I don't even know what to make of this guy. He can't throw a strike.
Yeah, Noah Schultz was in a similar boat in terms of struggling at Double-A, and I was almost relieved when he disclosed he had patellar tendonitis because it was tough for him in a way I hadn't seen it look tough. And there's talk about he's adding a cutter and it's taken away from his slider, and I was concerned that the White Sox had broken something that didn't need fixing in a quest to add something, and they're kind of trying to solve a problem before it's a problem. And, once they said the knee with the plant leg was affecting him and he wasn't throwing strikes, like I was almost relieved, but then it opens up another can of worms in terms of like, well, this is another year that's affected by injury. So How do you balance that?
It could explain, obviously any player, I did a Blue Jays podcast earlier talking about Arjun Nimala and their system, who may have been battling a shoulder thing for part of the season. And maybe that explains his struggles. I don't love necessarily just pinning it on that, especially when we don't know the full extent of an injury, but it's useful to know. Maybe this guy wasn't actually 100% during the season. And Schultz's delivery, you and I may have even talked about this in a previous year too. He is almost 7 feet tall. Like, dude, stride longer, get as much extension as you can. It's going to look like, from a left-handed hitter, it's going to look like it's coming from behind his ear. And he doesn't. And I wonder if some of that is knee discomfort, right? Is that actually why he's maybe not able to stride and plant? That's not easy. I sort of, wave my hands around like, oh, just do this. No, that's not an easy thing to do. He should be getting more extension out front. His stuff should be playing up a bit more. And he should be throwing more strikes, or more quality strikes, I think. So that could explain a lot of it. They've also been super aggressive with him, is the other thing. He's just moved up really quickly, despite the fact that he hasn't pitched all that much because of various minor injuries. Would love to see a healthy, I think that I'm stealing this from Joe Sheehan, but a consolidation year. Just sort of, hey, dude, you're going to just be a AAA all year. And all we want you to do is you take the ball once a week and go out, throw your 6 innings and get some ground balls and work on little things. Better location within the zone. Extend a little bit more over your front side. I think I wrote he was 6'4", 6'5" for extension. Can we bump that up a little bit without throwing your entire mechanics off, just to take advantage of the fact that you are giant? Little things like that I think put him on a better track to be a big league starter. He's very unlikely to be an ace or even a number 2. But I think the perfect world of Noah Schultz is a guy who soaks up a lot of innings towards the middle of a rotation. And, I think he underpitches his stuff now. He could outpitch his stuff with small, if possible, small tweaks to the delivery, particularly getting him out over that front side.
When it comes to Smith and Schultz struggling at Double-A, it was weird seeing him struggle at Double-A because otherwise Birmingham was held a hidden. You had Shane Murphy with a 1.3 something ERA. You had Jake Polish, a sub-2 ERA. You had Tyler Schweitzer throwing 41 innings without giving up a run. And then you had Smith and Schultz kind of struggling. The Southern League is, watching the Barons, they've won 2 championships in a row, basically slap and dash 1890s offense style with the Riku Nishida and William Bergoya and Sam Antonacci at the top. And it works. But in terms of like evaluating the Southern League outside the Barons, is it that tough for offense, or, how should we calibrate pitching and power hitting in that environment where nobody, the Barons are terrible in terms of power hitting, but nobody really seemed to light up any pitching down there?
Yeah, that league, and that's one of the leagues where they've been messing with the ball. I don't think they were last year, but previously they had tried the pre-tacked balls there, and that kind of messed everybody up for 2 months, and people complained, and I think they actually curtailed the experiment, which, can we maybe not do this stuff with actual prospects? Like, there's a billion indie and summer leagues and all this other stuff. Do that there. Go do that in Europe or whatever. But I don't think that league is a traditionally low offense league. It's not like it's full of extreme pitchers parks or anything, but it just was that way last year. It may have been a little bit unbalanced in terms of more pitching prospects there and fewer hitting prospects. If you had just asked me cold, I would have said, not looking at last year or anything, I would have said the Eastern League is the toughest for hitters. It has had that reputation forever. Some of that is the ballparks. A lot of that is that it's just cold up here. And the Texas League has pretty much always been a hitter's league for as far as I can remember. And the Southern League was kind of in the middle. So my guess is last year we probably just had a little bit of a skew in terms of the players there, because if there is an environmental factor pushing that more towards the pitching side, I'm not aware of it.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know if it's just a one-off or if you're talking to your teams and scouts just being like, we don't expect anybody to hit it here.
No, I hear that sometimes. There's certainly plenty of parks like that, or leagues occasionally. Florida State League, everyone's like, nobody hits there. Nobody hits there. Nobody goes to the game. It's 1,000% humidity, and why do we live here?
All right. So when it comes to the system overall, it seems like they're doing a pretty good job of producing players and some upside, despite still not really getting their international program off the ground. They're trying to get a new facility up and running by the end of the year. They've changed scouting directors. David Keller is now in charge. They're drafting pitchers. They're starting to make some inroads in the Dominican. When it comes to filling out their system and not having these big dips after graduation year, it really seems like that's the missing element. That's what keeps them from ever reaching the upside of teams they're trying to emulate, like the Brewers or the Rays, to get that constant stream of useful players.
And I think I would add 2 years kind of in the wilderness in terms of analytics, technology, new ideas. They just kept falling further and further behind. I think a lot of it was that, we've learned there was some infighting between Rakan and his group, who wanted to try to modernize a bit, and Kenny Williams, who it sounds like was just still way too involved when he shouldn't have been, and was possibly one of the forces hindering that kind of progress. Now they are trying to do that. It takes years. I mean, we're going to see this in Colorado, where Paul DePodesta, who obviously everyone thinks is actually just a spreadsheet in human form, is going to try to modernize probably the least modern of all 30 organizations. And it's going to take years to do that, because it is about adding facilities, adding personnel, but then also just changing an entire culture and mindset of an organization. Like, I love the fact the White Sox brought in Carlos Rodriguez from Tampa Bay, who I think is tremendous, who has experience on the player development and international side, who comes from an organization that's very good about integrating scouting and analytics, and that's very good about empowering its people. Tampa Bay, and we've seen that culture in Los Angeles too, with Andrew Friedman, obviously the common DNA there. You talk to scouts for either of those organizations, and they know kind of everything that's going on. They feel really involved in decisions. They understand what's asked of them and what tools are at their disposal and what they're looking for. And they all very much talk like they're on the same team and they're going in the same direction. That's what the best organizations do inside and outside of sports. And I think bringing him in is an acknowledgement, not just that he's great, but that, hey, we need to reset the culture here a bit after years of kind of organizational dysfunction. Let's get everybody on the same page, moving in the right direction, moving towards modernity and towards a more balanced approach that does not eschew scouting at all, but brings in more information so that everyone can make better decisions. And I think that'll help on the domestic scouting side, on pro scouting. It will show up in international, but that's going to take a long time. That is a lot, because those players are often locked up to verbal agreements 2 and 3 years out. And so it takes a while, even just to get to the point where you're signing different players. And then obviously those guys get in at 16, 17, it takes a couple more years to really start to see results from your international signing free agency program.
Yeah, it's kind of funny when we talk about the infighting and modernizing it all. It kind of feels like we're just talking around Jacob Gonzalez in terms of being a watershed draft of just something. This is no longer tenable. We can't keep doing this. Something needs to change. And I guess Getz being around and being elevated does seem like one side one. Maybe it's a 3-front war. Who knows? Like maybe it was like Chinese checkers where they're coming in at all angles and you don't know. But I watched Gonzalez and he's just kind of a guy at this point and feel like kind of bad for him because a lot of people point to him saying like he's the reason why there is change, and just it's a weird spot for him to be in.
Yeah, it's not his fault. It was a mediocre pick. It was an uninspiring pick. And it turned out he was worse than even his biggest critics saw it. I had him ranked at the very end of the first round, and that was too high, right? So you can only criticize the White Sox so much. Yeah, I think that was kind of the fact that they signed him, and almost immediately other teams were seeing him. Pro scouts were like, what the? this guy was a first rounder. Like, are you kidding me? He can't do anything. And he's going to play in the big leagues, obviously. But the point is they needed a culture change. And I give Getz credit, right? One thing that worried me about Getz is that he had brought in only a couple of people from outside, and bringing in someone like Carlos, where I don't even know what their personal connection was, but from a completely different organization where there's no obvious tie. It's not like Chris bringing in guys from Kansas City who he worked with, right? This is just somebody totally different from a different organization that views the world differently, that operates differently, and elevating him to a pretty senior position. To me, that is huge. That is how you try to implement culture change on a grand scale, and also to get all your people right. They didn't fire a lot of people, which is good. I don't want to see anybody getting fired, but then you have to change the mindset of an entire staff of people. And this is how you do so, by bringing in new voices, new people atop the hierarchy who will come in with a different philosophy and be able to communicate that down through the entire org chart.
This is Steve Smith here, former NFL wide receiver and host of the 89 show on YouTube. In my day, I'd go up against defenders twice my size and wasn't afraid of getting hit. But one thing terrified me, people learning I had a mental health issue. I thought I'll seem weak, but being open about your struggles isn't weak. It's the only way to overcome them. That's where BetterHelp Online Therapy comes in. Visit BetterHelp.com/radio, BetterHelp.com/radio to get started. BetterHelp.com/radio.
At the winter meeting, seeing people in the White Sox front office after the draft lottery and after the White Sox got the #1 overall pick, we haven't seen that many smiles from White Sox executives in a long time. Like they were celebrating. And Roch Cholowsky seems destined for the White Sox, if only because Chicago accents will make a meal of his name. It's like this Roch Cholowsky. Like it's really perfect in that regard. But is it him? Is he the guy? Is it Roch Cholowsky versus anybody else, or is it like Roch Cholowsky versus the field in terms of thinking the White Sox will select him?
So I think I would go into this saying he's the favorite. He is the strongest 1-1 we've had since Adley Rutschman in 2019. I've also pointed out the best player in the 2019 draft was Bobby Witt Jr., not Adley Rutschman. So, and also the preseason 1-1 or the fall 1-1 favorite doesn't always go 1-1. Bryce Terang was that guy at one point. Brady Singer was that guy at one point. A lot of them just don't work out. And it's actually one reason I've stopped doing any kind of draft rankings in the fall, because I think they're just nonsense at that point. You've really got to get the spring season started somehow and get actually looks in the platform year to start evaluating and ranking these guys. When I do a ranking later this month, Cholowsky will be one. There are some other really good college position players in this class. There's one high school position player, Grady Emerson, in the Dallas area, who I think is head and shoulders above the rest of that group. I don't think we have a 1-1 candidate pitcher right now. That would be a college pitcher, obviously. I don't think that guy exists yet. He could. Somebody could come out of the gate first couple of weeks blowing and run himself up the board. Liam Doyle was nobody last year at this time, and then within a month he was getting 1-1 talk, and he nearly went 3 or 5 and ended up going 5. Right? A lot will change. But if you were saying, Keith, put $100 on somebody to go, a specific player to go 1-1 right now, I would do it on Cholowsky. And I think it's probably even money that it's him. It's a shortstop with some power, great makeup. Everyone knows him. His dad's a scout for the Reds. So we've all seen him a ton. I saw him in high school. I thought he was a first rounder then. He's performed, and he's going to be there. He's going to have some preseason series because UCLA plays in the Big Ten, which is not a very good baseball conference. He's going to have some preseason series that I think are going to end up counting quite a bit because it's going to be the best pitching you'll see all year. So within a month, we'll know if there's any reason not to have him at 1. I don't expect that, but I think that's where we're headed. And then the question for the White Sox will be, do you take the best player and probably pay him, close to full slot? No one gets full slot at 1, but something close to that. Or do you try to get creative because you have so much money and take a player who might sign for $1 million less so that you can go get multiple other players with subsequent picks? Sometimes it's a good strategy. I look at Cleveland's draft from a couple of years ago, and they did that with Travis Bazzana. The high school pitchers they took behind him look pretty good as a group, but Bazzana doesn't. So did they potentially miss out on taking like Nick Kurtz or someone else from that class who would be better, who would be potentially in the big leagues for them right now? So that is a separate question from who is actually the best player. And right now, I think that's Roch.
Where would he rank if he were in the top 100, if he were a minor league prospect versus a college bat?
So typically, and last year was not typical, but the guy I have first on my draft board in July nearly always is in the top 20, 25 at worst the following spring. We did have kind of an exception last year where there was just never a great 1-1 guy. I don't think I have anybody from last year's draft in my top 25, and Ethan Holiday was number 1 on my draft board on draft day and then looked really bad after the draft to the point where, as I'm circulating the draft rough cut of my top 100, people are saying just slide him, don't take him off, but just slide him down a little bit. There's definitely some hit tool concerns there. And I had scouts coming back and saying, we think he's a right fielder. I'm like, Jesus Christ, this guy was playing short. And I didn't think he was a shortstop, but like, that's a big drop. And now suddenly is it Chris Bryant? Is it Nolan Jones? Right? Then you start to get a little concerned. But in a typical year, 1-1 is a top 20, 25 prospect. I don't see any reason to think Cholowsky would be different, given what I've seen from him in the past and what he's done 2 years at UCLA.
And the White Sox, if they go that route, or even Grady Emerson, they've been drafting a lot of shortstops, which is great. After seeing them draft so many first basemen, left fielders, they're prioritizing up the middle. Who would make in their system both now and if they add guys, who would make the best outfielders in a perfect world where like all of these guys hit and somebody needs to play shortstop and everybody else needs to play elsewhere?
That's a great question. Because you don't want to move someone off the dirt unless you have to. And none of these guys we're talking about is a burner where you think, well, you just stick them in center. Right? And we retain a lot of that value. Like, to me, Bonemer is probably the least chance to stick at shortstop, including guys in the system and guys they might potentially draft with that first pick. But you're not putting him in center, right? You're putting one of these guys in the outfield. Maybe it's, before we saw Colson Montgomery play really good defense for 2 months in the big leagues, I might have said him. Because he's awfully big for shortstop. He's never really played it particularly well, certainly not since that year in the breakout year. He had his first full season. Maybe he would be a good right fielder, but also I kind of want to see what he does over a full season at shortstop. Maybe he's elevated his game. Maybe he's a lot better. Maybe his back finally feels good. I would love to know what that's like. Maybe he feels better now and he can move around the outfield. He can stick on the infield and you move somebody else to the outfield. Cholowsky is, by all accounts, a shortstop. He could move to third base, though. I don't think you're losing a whole lot. Carlson has the chance, obviously, to be the best defender of all. So you do want to think a little bit around him. And there are some outfielders in this class. I don't know that there's anybody who's good enough that I would say, yeah, you could take him over Cholowsky and you'd be fine. Let's see how some of these guys do before. The best players in this class, and there are some good bats, best players in this class are at least starting out on the dirt. And so I don't think that solves the particular logjam you're talking about. Although at the end of the day, just take the best player. They'll sort themselves out.
I've been working in questions from Sox Machine supporters throughout this conversation, but a couple couldn't quite work in. So I'm just going to ask them to break off the conversation and ask them straight up. One was a question from Steve wondering about the impact of ABS and having the challenge system going to the majors. Like, are there any consequences or strange effects you've seen of this system in place, whether it's like catcher value, whether it's in terms of strike zone size, where players who are smaller or larger benefit or are hurt by it, to understand like how value of players might be affected in ways that we don't know?
Walks are up in AAA. They're up pretty substantially since they started using it there. And that's what I expect to see in the short term. I do think that these things tend to rebalance themselves once pitchers realize I'm not getting that pitch an inch or two off the plate. They're going to try to come in the zone a bit more. And then I think walks will come down, but we'll probably see more balls put into play, which is good, right? That is a problem. The size of the strike zone, first of all, the fact that it's almost amorphous. And second is that it's probably too big, particularly laterally. but even up and down, right? You don't want any of those pitches to be called strikes if they're not actually strikes, because that leads us to situations we already have too many strikeouts and not enough balls hit into play. So to me, that's the biggest thing. And we've seen a lot of guys with pretty questionable plate discipline, particularly in terms of ball strike judgment, get to AAA and suddenly they're walking more, and people are, oh my God, he's finally learned to. No, it's the ABS that's actually making a huge difference. For a lot of those guys with kind of marginal plate discipline, that's where I'm seeing it show up. I do also think it's going to make catcher framing less relevant. I'd be fine if it makes catcher framing obsolete. I think it's a ridiculous idea to call that a skill. I understand it's something that can be taught, but it's something that can be pretty easily taught. We've seen the general level of catcher framing has gone way, way up since it was first discovered. And so if that goes away and a strike is just a strike, that seems fine with me. And that will overall long term probably change how we evaluate certain catchers. I think we get back to the things that used to matter: receiving and blocking, to some extent throwing. And unless you're with the Marlins, game calling. These are all things I would like to see kind of elevated in our evaluations of catchers, with framing going down, if not going away entirely.
Do you hate the idea of pitches being called from the dugout?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sounded like it all time, college and high school. It's not because it's not part of the game, right? Not that wedded to history. I'm fine with automated calling of balls and strikes once the technology is good enough to allow us to do that. So it is not old man yells at cloud, I can do that if you want, but that's really not what this is. It's that's part of the game. And this is an expectation particularly for pitchers. I mean, I understand we put game calling on catchers. That's a lot of work. We ask a lot of catchers, and I think that's part of the job. I think giving people ownership and autonomy is a good thing, no matter what your role is, what your industry is. And I think taking that away from, particularly the Marlins are not doing that with their prospects, taking that away from pitchers and from catchers is depriving them of a chance, not just for baseball growth, but personal growth, letting them have more ownership over the game that they're, in the case of the pitcher, of the game they're pitching, and then feeling more responsibility and accountability for the results, whether it turns out to be pride or it turns out to be answering for things that didn't go well. So taking that away from them, I think it feels a bit like helicopter parenting your prospects. Like, no, let them go out and succeed and fail on their own.
Well, it almost feels like, to me, signing a non-compete clause, because, I remember like a guy like Zach Collins, and say what you will about his catching skills, but just in terms of when he looked blocked or looked like he might not have a role with the White Sox, he's saying, well, I'm auditioning for 29 other teams. Like, I'm playing for other teams as well at AAA. And if you're taking away responsibility, you're kind of hurting that player's ability to market himself to other teams. And he's more of a black box in terms of, well, if he comes to the organization, does he know how to call a game? How far behind is he because he's not being allowed to have these skills develop?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. Then you're saying, well, this guy's less valuable to the other teams. Why would you want to do that? Like, I'm not saying don't innovate, but don't innovate in a way that makes your players worth less in trade. And obviously potentially hurts them if they should become free agents or be designated for assignment or anything like that. But just from, if you're being strictly cold-hearted as a general manager, you want to boost the trade value of your players as much as possible. You always want them to appear to be more valuable than they actually are. And I think this does move them in the other direction. Imagine being a player who's drafted by the Marlins, spends 3-4 years in their system, never learns how to call a game, pitcher or catcher, and then you get traded or in any way, shape, or form shifted to another organization. They're like, all right, let's talk about your game calling philosophy. And they just go blink, 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 because they have no idea what you're talking about. They've never done it. They haven't done it since probably ever, because a lot of colleges don't teach their guys to do it. Very few high schools ever let their guys do it. So you could be talking about a 24-year-old catcher who's never called a game in his life, or a pitcher who hasn't called his own game in years, if ever. Yeah, I don't think that makes a lot of sense. It's certainly not good for the players, and I don't actually think it's good for the team either.
And then one more question from a different Steve, who he notes that he loves your list because they are one person's opinion, more or less. I know you workshop it with source and such, but it's not brought to the median by committee. And I think Braden Montgomery's an interesting point about this, because you have them. I think your ranking and Kylie McDaniel's ranking are about 140 spots apart. And
yes, somebody brought this up, and Kylie's great.
Yeah,
and I'm not asking. There's a huge gap between the two.
Yeah, I'm not asking you to slander another writer. It's more I appreciate that spectrum because it kind of gives me an idea of what the range of possibilities could be. He could be somebody who makes a few all-star games at the majors. He could kind of hit a ceiling in AAA, and I like having that range of expectations or projections represented in some form or another. So, as much fun as it might be to say scoreboard, if somebody's wrong, it's more like for my knowledge about a player and what people are thinking, like it's very helpful. But he asks, with that in mind of being one person whose rankings are out there for kind of everybody to see, do you have a blind spot that your analysis that is there and you're working on? And he said like you're prejudiced against shorter players or something similar, but I think, based on comments you made, you would not be prejudiced against shorter players. I think you would want to see them succeed.
I'm not a player, but I am also fun sized. I mean, the answer, of course, is I have some biases or leanings. One came up where I really don't like this trend of pitchers with super short arm actions. I don't think we have a good body of evidence to show that guys can pitch like that and stay healthy. For years, most of my career, that was seen as a huge negative. Now, I also understand we have a greater understanding of mechanics, of kinesiology, of what is and isn't effective. There's been a lot of talk recently that the traditional 3/4 arm slot, which often not seen as the ideal, but was sort of a maybe a target to go for if guys were too far away from that in either direction, it was seen as a negative. Turns out 3/4 is actually not very effective. And so getting even a little bit away from that can make a pitcher better by making his, maybe if he's going higher, it can get more at that sort of top rail ride on the fastball. Also, anything away from 3/4 just adds some deception. So I do try to change with the knowledge of the sport and to understand what teams are looking for or not looking for. It doesn't mean I always necessarily agree with it. I do see a lot of teams that I think know better investing in pitchers who tend to throw a bit across their body. Now, a little bit is fine. I don't think it's the end of the world, but guys who throw way too much across their body, they do seem to get hurt. I have a pretty large body of, anecdotal evidence, but it's in 20 odd years where I say, I still don't like that. I still think those guys have a lot of problems. They have health problems. They have effectiveness problems. What I try to do with short armers or cross-body guys, or I could probably go on and on about things I think are better or worse, is just be open-minded, right? Chris Sale is relevant to this podcast, a guy I was pretty famously wrong on because I looked at the delivery, I looked at the lack of any kind of average breaking ball when he was in college and said, that's not going to work. It's a reliever all the way. Nobody pitches like that in a rotation, and certainly a left-hander with no average breaking ball. He broke the rules, and there are going to be more guys like that. So just to be more open-minded, more aware that there can be exceptions. The pitcher I'm talking about with the short arm action, I had him 6th in my Blue Jays rankings. I said, I don't like it. But at the end of the day, he's been healthy and effective up through AA as a starter. And until he has some kind of more significant problem, I can note that. I noted my number 1 overall prospect, Connor Griffin, bars his lead arm. Don't like that either. But I just said, the hell with it. This guy's a superstar. He is an exception. He's way too athletic. He's way too smart of a hitter. It's not going to matter. So I know those biases exist. There are probably biases I don't know exist, but I do try to look for them so that I can at least work my way around them, even if I know they're still there. I'm still going to watch Connor Griffin and be like, stop barring that lead arm while he's hitting like 380 in the big leagues.
You're like the National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, like the lights aren't twinkling. There's always something to be better.
My God, my wife loves that movie, and I'm like, I hate this stupid movie so much. And she makes the kids watch it every year, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to go shovel snow or something, anything.
Yeah, that line sticks with me whenever there's something that could be better.
That you mentioned it. Yep.
This is Steve Smith here, former NFL wide receiver and host of the 89 Show on YouTube. In my day, I go up against defenders twice my size and wasn't afraid of getting hit. But one thing terrified me, people learning I had a mental health issue. I thought I'll seem weak, but being open about your struggles isn't weak. It's the only way to overcome them. That's where BetterHelp Online Therapy comes in. Visit BetterHelp.com/radio, BetterHelp, betterhelp.com/radio to get started. betterhelp.com/radio.
And then finally, we always wrap up your appearances with a book recommendation. I just got done reading James by Percival Everett, a book I'd been kind of avoiding because, I read Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead, and that was just so visceral. Like, I'm glad I read it, but also so visceral that it kind of haunted me for a while. And I was thinking, like, I don't know if I want to dive into it. And it turned out to be like similar themes covered, but different approach. A little bit of that, Mark Twain inspired humor to lighten it up a little bit, while also being, expressing very raw emotions and anger very effectively. So I would recommend that one. But what have you got for us recently?
Have you seen the Nickel Boys movie?
I have not.
It's fantastic.
Okay.
It's going to be a tough watch, though. If that's how you felt about the book, it's even worse because it's all shot in sort of first person perspective. So it is you are in it, very much in it. And it's a tough watch. Even knowing what's going to happen at the end, it is a tough watch. But it was excellent. Best book I've read recently would be, it won the National Book Award this year, last fall. It's called The True Story of Raja the Gullible and His Mother by Rabi Alamedine. It is hilarious. It is sort of hysterical realism. Fans of Zadie Smith maybe might know the phrase, or at least know that style. It is set over 60 years in Lebanon, mostly in Beirut, told by the main character, Raja the Gullible, who is a gay, slightly to increasingly overweight philosophy teacher there, who goes through sort of a picaresque series of adventures, each of which ties to some major event in Lebanese history, like the Civil War or the port explosion or even COVID. And he uses them as kind of a backdrop for telling these like comically absurd stories about this really wonderful main character. And so I read that and read Flesh, which won the Booker Prize, and a couple of other sort of, did a little bit of a lit run in January before the prospect stuff started. I was like, I can't read anything. I just need to write. But that one, Raja the Gullible, is probably the best thing I've read in the last 3 or 4 months.
All right. Well, as always, we appreciate your time on the Sox Machine podcast. And I imagine, if you're willing, we'll have you back midsummer to talk about a very important White Sox draft pick and help us sort it out. Whether it's Cholowsky, Emerson, anybody else who pops up, we'll be. We'd love to have your input.
My pleasure. We'd love to do it.
That's Keith Law, whose work you can find at The Athletic and who you can find on social media platforms at Keith Law. He also writes about board games for AV Club and Paste magazine, covers books and music on his own blog. He's basically always writing, so the least you can do is read it. Josh Nelson will be back for Monday's Sox Machine podcast, and so will James Fegan, who is down at Camelback Ranch offering first-hand reports from White Sox spring training. You can get access to all of our coverage at soxmachine.com. Plans start at $5 a month, with 1 month free on every annual subscription. Also, if you don't subscribe to our YouTube channel, James is sending video from spring training to Josh, who is chopping it up into shorts for convenient viewing. You can see it all at youtube.com/SoxMachine. The Sox Machine podcast is a production of SoxMachine.com and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. For Josh Nelson and James Fegan, I'm Jim Margalus. Thanks for listening.